I'd like to welcome everyone who's here. We have a large group. We have over 50 people on the Zoom, which is why it's so important for everyone to keep their mute button on, because there's a lot of background noise where a lot of you are, I'm sure, today. So my name is Tina Fetzer. I'm the contract specialist or the contract supervisor. And typically I have someone, actually, I think Ashley has joined us. Ashley Fairburn is our VPK Contract Specialist who is responsible for the northern half of the county. She will be available to answer questions that I may not have answers to, so she may be jumping in at some point as I'm asking these questions. We are looking forward to reviewing this information with you, answering any questions you have related to the upcoming VPK year. Please mute your phones. If you have your phones, keep yourselves muted as you are in these sessions. And our agenda is going to include the following items. We're going to be conducting a brief overview of the changes to the VPK contract from last year to this year. We'll also be talking about new policies and review some tips for successful completion of your applications and your contracts. Please note that all the contract, rule, and policy changes that have been made were made by the State Department of Education Division of Early Learning in order to meet new law and code requirements as determined by the passing of legislation by the Florida state government. So these changes have precipitated changes in some of our local ELC policies as well, and we'll be discussing those. All right. Most of the changes to this year's contract and rules and policies are a result of House Bill 419. So we're going to review House Bill 419 kind of in an overall summary. Then we are going to look at the contract changes that came from that. We're going to review the policy changes, and then we're going to go over those contract tips and tricks so that you all can be successful. We are running out of time to get applications and VPK contracts in and certified. So it is important that you are successful this first time that you submit. So we're going to talk about how to do that. All righty. And then we're going to review questions. Anybody that has questions, you can type questions into the chat box as we go. It's not necessary that you wait till the end to type those questions in. I do have the chat box open in front of me, so if I see something there, I can read that question for you and then provide an answer, hopefully. Now, knowing that House Bill 419 was just passed a year ago, a lot of things are still in the works, and there are things that I do not have answers for. So if we have the answers or we think we have a good idea of where it's going, we will share that. But for the things that have not been worked out yet, I will just have to tell you that we will inform you as soon as we have answers to some of those things. And I know you're going to ask those questions because we had a group last night down at PTech South, and they asked lots of questions too. So I know we're going to have quite a few questions. So just so you know, House Bill 419 passed unanimously in both the Senate and in the House, and it was signed by the governor and became effective last July. So some of the main points of House Bill 419, just kind of in a simplified version, include changing the Office of Early Learning and moving it under the Department of Education. So now it is the Division of Early Learning in the Department of Education, instead of being a freestanding Office of Early Learning as it was before. One of the other changes that happened with House Bill 419 is that the gold seal moved from the Department of Children and Families to Department of Children and Families used to manage the gold seal program. It's now being managed by the Department of Education. And some of the big things that are going to be impacting you are the fact that the readiness rate and the old assessment that we did and entered in Bright Beginnings is no longer. They're doing away with the readiness rates and doing away with the assessment from the Bright Beginnings. Now, we do have a new assessment. And so we are going to be moving forward and calling that, they've changed the language. It's no longer readiness rate and assessment. It's now coordinated screening and progress monitoring. And you will all have a designation in your performance metric. And we're going to talk about those things in detail later. So if you can just be patient with the questions, we'll get to those in just a little bit. The other big thing that's has impacted you all, and you've known about this for quite some time because we started sending out the information to you all in January, is the requirement for instructors to have those 3 5-hour approved early literacy or emergent literacy courses. So lead instructors have that coursework that they have to complete. And then there are also requirements for the directors for their VPK credential. The standards course, the only one acceptable now is the implementing the Florida standards in preschool classrooms, 3 years old to kindergarten. That is the standards course that has to be taken. If you have a previous version and it does not have that title, it's very likely that you will have to redo that course. Please note that all of the coursework, the literacy courses, the credentials, and everything being turned in has to be completed before your classroom can begin, before instructional hours begin. There is no grandfathering in, there's no teaching while you're working on it. Everything has to be in place at the time the course begins or the class begins. The other thing that happened with House Bill 419 is a quality assessment for your program. So the class assessment measures teacher-child interaction quality in the classroom. The class assessment will be delivered during your instructional hours. And we're going to talk about some specifics around class as well, but a program assessment for quality interactions was added with this bill. And additionally, something that doesn't affect you as much as it affects the coalition is that there will be an evaluation of the coalitions to make sure that they are providing the necessary supports and resources for the providers in their county. So there will be an evaluation process of the early learning coalitions at the state level to ensure that we are meeting everyone's needs. You may be asked to participate in that in the form of a survey or some other type of feedback at some point over the next year. So just wanted to kind of give you a heads up about that. The other big thing is that the new Florida statutes now require the district schools to be added to the private provider monitoring by the coalition. So the coalition will now be monitoring the private providers as we always have, but now we will also be monitoring the district school locations. That adds 70 VPK locations and probably over 140 VPK classrooms to the coalition's responsibilities for managing and monitoring VPK program in Pinellas County this next year. So, now that bill passed a year ago and you're thinking, okay, so why were we just hearing about this stuff now? Well, a lot of the things had to be worked out in terms of the assessment tools that were going to be used. There had to be some evaluation done. Some of the literacy courses needed to be updated, but everything was pretty much decided upon by November. Information started coming out from the Department of, or the Division of Early Learning in November. We started really heavily putting this in all of our e-newsletters in January. And your VPK specialists have been emailing with you and sending you updates on a regular basis. So I hope that what I just went over for House Bill 419 and that summary was not a surprise to anybody. So if anyone has any questions at any point, you can put those in the chat box. Okay, so that's the basic overview of House Bill 419. So now we're going to kind of get into the nitty-gritty of the contract changes. And essentially what I did is I took the 21-22 contract and the 22-23 contract, and I put them on two screens side by side and went line by line to see what had changed. Now, there are some things that happen throughout the contract, and then there are a lot of things, and most of the changes that are in the contract relate to those House Bill 419 requirements. So you may have noticed that the contract is now identified as Form DEL VPK 20. And the Office of Early Learning, as I said before, was switched over to the Department of Education and became the Division of Early Learning. So on a lot of their forms that used to say OEL, you will now see a DEL. Now, they haven't gotten to all the forms yet, so you will still see a few OELs out there. But, and then you're also going to see that the date on the bottom of this year's contract is for March of 22. That's when the State Board of Education passed, agreed to, and certified and said that, yes, this is the contract we'll be using this year. It was at the March meeting. So that's the reason you see the March 2022 date on the contract. Now, the DEL, and as I go through these slides, the DEL reference is throughout the entire contract. I did not reference every single page of the contract that has DEL instead of OEL. You're just going to know that that's a change throughout the contract. And the same is true where it used to reference the office. A lot of times, you know, you would see in capital letters, it says the office, or it would say the coalition, or it would say the provider, and they put those in all caps in the contract. Well, now instead of office, a lot of times you're going to see the word department because they're referring to the Department of Education. So those are consistent changes throughout the entire contract. The very first time that you're going to see that change is in the provider eligibility. And if you look in the required forms section, there is a paragraph reference change. A new paragraph was added to the contract this year, and we're going to go over that paragraph when we get to it. But paragraph 40 is a new paragraph. So everything after paragraph 40 was pushed up a number. So old paragraph 40 is now paragraph 41. So in the contract where it used to reference, you know, makes a reference to paragraph 50, now it says paragraph 51. So that's the thing. Any references to paragraphs after 40 are now bumped up a number from last year's contract. Okay, someone is asking a question. Can proof of a current Naeyc accreditation suffice for class, or does everyone have to participate? Everyone has to participate. It is in state statute that all VPK classrooms will have a class assessment. And we'll talk about what that entails in a little bit. If you're familiar with class, you know it requires an in-person assessment by a certified assessor in your classroom. So regardless of any accreditation standing or anything else, all classrooms must participate. Camille, thank you for answering that question. Camille Mendez is with us. She is our assessment, quality programs and assessment supervisor, and she will be able to answer any of your questions around class and how those will impact your VPK classroom. I'm going to go over some of the basic details, but if you have specific questions, I am so happy that she is here. And as I said before, Ashley Fairburn is here. She is one of our VPK Contract Specialists. So when you get questions about application and contract work, she will be available in your transcripts. She'll be able to help you with questions around that. And thank you for putting your questions in the chat box. Thanks, Phyllis, for putting that in there. That's wonderful. Okay, so I talked about the paragraph reference change. Now we're going to talk about the Section 3, providers' responsibilities and scope of work. The very first thing is you're going to see the assessment language. In the assessment paragraph, they've actually simplified the wording. They removed pre and post assessment, and they added the current terminology of coordinated screening and progress monitoring. That aligns with the new statutes and the reference in that statute. The statute outlines the requirements for the use of an assessment tool for students to measure learning gains and outcomes. The state has chosen STAR Early Literacy as the assessment tool that will be used for progress monitoring. Some of you may have participated in the pilot for STAR Early Literacy over the last couple years. And so you will be more familiar than those programs that have not participated. But it will require training for the lead instructor and or whoever is going to conduct the progress monitoring, as well as a training for the director, the VPK director, because there will be reports and other things that will have to be run. And we will discuss those when we get to that section of the PowerPoint. Okay. So some of you on the DEL website, floridaearlylearning.com, and could, let's see here, I'm going to put that in here, Florida Early Learning. That is the website that you will go to. And if you go there, you can click on the VPK tab. The very first item in the drop-down menu says FAST, Florida's Assessment of Student Thinking using STAR Early Literacy. That page contains access to the Renaissance website, which is where the assessment tool lives, the early literacy tool lives. It gives you access to register for trainings. Those trainings are designed for instructors, and then there is a link for a training designed for directors. So if you're doing both jobs, you'll want to make sure that you have adequate training in those positions. You can also find copies of communications that have gone out from the state, as well as resources for the STAR Early Literacy program. Now, important, this system replaces all the components that were previously accessible through Bright Beginnings. So unless you are doing summer VPK right now, there is no further need for using Bright Beginnings or ordering any future kit materials. Everything will be being done online. The assessment is a database program. There's no paper and pencil. There's none of that. Everything is done online. Second part of this statute also outlines in the assessment paragraph, outlines the use of a program assessment for providers in each VPK classroom to measure the teacher-child interactions. I talked about that before. That's the class assessment. Some of you who are also contracted for school readiness may already be familiar with the class assessment. It will be exactly the same. It will just be done in your VPK classroom. It is an assessment tool. The assessors are certified, reliable by the maker of the assessment tool. They come in and all the assessors are from the coalition. So when the coalition staff come in, you'll recognize them. These aren't going to be complete and total strangers. These will be people you've seen out and about for the last few years, running around the county and at the Early Learning Coalition office. But they will come in and they will observe in the classroom for 4 15 to 20 minute sessions. And they will score with those observations. They will score based on the tool's criteria. And then scores from all 4 periods are calculated to a final score for each classroom. And if you have more than one classroom, the classroom scores are then calculated together to provide you with an overall composite score for the program. We will talk about the class in a little bit more detail, and you can ask questions and Camille will be available to answer them. The next paragraph that changed in the contract was about curriculum. So it also simplified the curriculum references, because before it talked about all the things that the curriculum needed to do. Now really it just refers you to the statute. And I put the statute there in case you have some need to go look up a Florida state statute in the legislature. And that's one of the reasons that the contract, it's one of the reasons why it's so hard to read the contract, because it doesn't just come out and say everything. It refers to statutes and rules, and then you have to go look up the statute and the rule to know exactly what it is that it says. So that's why I'm trying to give you a better idea and a more normal explanation of these things, because all of this stuff is written kind of in lawyer speak. So Camille, I'm going to let you answer that question in the chat box. It's asking about SR and VPK and the class assessments.
Sure. So the question is, so if we have an SR contract and already participate in the class assessment, will we now have two separate composite scores, one for SR and one for VPK? Yes. So your SERPA assessments will still work in the same way. 50% of each care level, including the pre-K care level, will get randomly selected for class. The scores for those randomly selected rooms will contribute to your SR composite score, but all of your VPK rooms will be assessed. For the most part, this is going to happen around the same time. The only time it wouldn't happen is if there was some extenuating circumstance for SR that we had to assess you outside of your VPK program year. Otherwise, they'll happen around the same time. So then all of your VPK classroom scores will be averaged together for your VPK composite score.
Thank you. All right, so back to the curriculum. As I said, the language in the contract was simplified. Essentially, the statute basically says that each private and public school curriculum must be developmentally appropriate. It must be designed to prepare the child for early literacy and provide for some instruction in early math skills. It must enhance the age-appropriate progress of students in attaining performance standards that are adopted by the department. And it must support student learning gains through differentiated instruction that is going to be measured by the coordinated screening and progress monitoring tool. So that's essentially what the statute spells out that is no longer in the contract. The contract just refers to the statute. And then the final, or the other thing that was heavily influenced by House Bill 419 was the instructor requirements. And again, they've simplified that language in the contract by removing the specific instructor requirements and just referencing the statutes. The three statutes listed there, 0.55, 0.61, and 0.63, refer to the different types of instructors. So 0.55 are the requirements for private VPK instructors. 0.61 is for summer VPK instructors, and 0.63 is for district VPK instructors. So that's the reason that there are three statutes there, because they spell out those requirements for each different type of instructor. Okay. Here we go. And the last thing in that section 3, provider responsibilities and scope of work, that changed was some references in the deliverables. And so there are more reference changes in the contract paragraphs due to that addition of paragraph 40 that I mentioned before. But one of the things in the deliverables is, you remember that we had AP1, AP2, and AP3, and AP2 was optional. Well, now we have progress monitoring 1, progress monitoring 2, and progress monitoring 3, and all 3 progress monitorings must be completed. Now, I know a lot of you did AP2 anyway, but it wasn't necessary to enter the data. Well, now the data is automatically entered in the system when it happens. There's no more entering data. Everything's in there. It goes in. So there's no more having to sit down and put scores in. They automatically go into the system, and the child's score is available immediately. So with PM1 and PM3, the contract currently reads that those will be completed within the first 30 days of your program. There was recently a rule workshop where they were proposing using instructional days instead of calendar days for PM1 and PM3. Now, I'm going to tell you right now, the contract says calendar days. If the proposed rule language goes through, we will let you know. But if I were you, if it were me, I'm just going to say, if it were me, I would do it in the first 30 calendar days, because even if they change it to 30 instructional days, that extends the time that you can do it. I'd rather just get it done if it were me. So anyway, but just know that. And then you're going to ask, when is progress monitoring 2 supposed to be done? Well, it states that it will take place after at least 40% of the instructional hours have been completed, but before 60% of the instructional hours have been completed. Now, we all know we have 540 hours to work with. So for those of you who hate math, I did it for you. And 40% is, it must be completed after 216 hours of instructional time, but before 324 hours of instructional time. Now, if you'd like to know what that means in days, then you take your instructional hours, and most of you do a 3-hour day. Yes, nodding. Most people do a 3-hour day. So if you do a 3-hour instructional day for VPK, 40% would be after 72 instructional days, and before 60% would be before day 108. So when you're working on your calendars, you can be thinking about when that's going to be. So for a 3-hour day, it's after day 72, but before day 108. If you do something different than a 3-hour day, then we need to adjust the math. If you need help with that, I'm available. You're welcome. Somebody just thanked me for doing the math. You're welcome. All right. And then we talked about the calendar days versus the instructional days. So if that proposed rule language goes through, we will let you know as soon as we find out. Now, here's the kicker. Remember, I said there's no more sitting down and entering scores and into Bright Beginnings and all that, because everything calculates as soon as the child finishes their progress monitoring. All the results are already in the system. And as an instructor, I went to a training this last week. It was nice. It was nice to see how everything works. You actually can go in as soon as the child is done and create a PDF letter that has all of the child's results to the parent with an explanation of all of the categories for their progress. And that's good, because another requirement is, because of the statute, you do have to make sure that the parents are advised of the child's results within 7 calendar days after they have completed their assessment or their progress monitoring. Not 7 days after the window closes, but 7 days after each child completes their progress monitoring assessment. Now, I don't know whether or not that will be something that the coalition will have to monitor or not. They've not given us any direction on that. There is most likely, because we've been pushing for this, going to be a standard VPK monitoring tool that will be used across the state. The tool will not be a whole lot different than the tool you're already used to. When Amanda and Ashley come out and they bring their little monitoring paper with them and they do the monitoring tool, we're looking for certain things. And what we're looking for is to make sure that the requirements of the contract are being met, which is all of these things. You know, they look and they check out your staff's education file, and they look at attendance, and they do all kinds of different things. So they're going to continue to do that with, you know, maybe 1 or 2 different things, but this may be something that is included on the monitoring tool. I don't expect to see it this year, but possibly by next year. So please make sure that you're getting those parent notifications out to parents within those 7 days. Someone asked the question last night, Well, how will you know that? And there's one of two ways that you could do that. You could print the letter out, a duplicate letter out, have the parent sign and date it and put it in the child's file. That way, then we know that the parent saw it. The other thing that you could do is if you're planning on sending that letter electronically by email, you can totally do that and print out the email. Save that as a PDF and put that in the child's file. So that's certainly acceptable too, because that will have the date and the time on it that it was emailed to the parent. So either one of those options would suffice for our purposes to make sure that the parents were notified within 7 days of their child's assessment results. All right, one other rule changes the limits of the number of children being assessed by a single certified assessor. And you may not have more than 5 children at a time with a single instructor. Now, I think this is geared more towards district school classrooms where they take the children like to a computer lab and the kids all sit there and do their assessment. I think for the most part, probably most of our classrooms only have 1 or 2 computers or 1 or 2 tablets to use for assessing at a time. I would really encourage everyone as a best practice to do it one-on-one. And I say that because one of the things that they talked about at the training, and one of the things that you will hear in your training, is that if you have a clicker happy child who uses a computer like my mother uses a computer, she's not a patient person, and she's click, 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 touch, 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 touch. What ends up happening is the assessment tool kicks the child out, and it looks like they've completed the assessment, but they haven't. And so it's really very important to be close enough to see how the child is using the tablet or the PC or the laptop to complete their assessment. But in any case, you are not allowed to do more than 5 children at any one time for the assessment process, the progress monitoring. Okay. All right, and then the next thing is coalition responsibilities. This item previously just focused on providers on probation, saying that the coalition needed to provide training and technical assistance for providers on probation. It now says we need to provide that for all providers, including those on probation. So part of the reason why we're offering this today is to provide that training and technical assistance for you all, so you know what is coming this year. And I know there have been a lot of conferences and a lot of phone calls and a lot of webinars and a lot of communications that go out, but sometimes it's just a whole lot easier to get together so where everybody can hear the same thing at the same time and ask questions. So that's part of the reason that we're providing this. And if you have questions after today, or we get done today and something pops into your head, Ashley and Amanda is our contract specialist for South County, are available to answer your questions. So please don't hesitate to give them a call. Okay, monitoring, auditing, and access is the next section that had a change. Thank you, Ashley. Ashley put a reminder in the chat box for everyone. So this year in paragraph 31 in the monitoring section, it talks about the addition of a requirement for producing records that are not accessible at the time of the monitoring visit. You know, sometimes the contract specialists come out and you're missing something from a file. Or in the case of the districts, because now we're going to be monitoring the districts, they probably do not have a lot of those items right there at the school site because most of them are probably at the district office. So what this requires now is that any documents that you do not have when we come out to do a monitoring visit must be submitted for review within 72 hours, 3 days of the monitoring visit. I think most of the time we do our corrective action for 3 days anyway, but this now puts it in black and white in the contract and in the statute. So just know that you need to produce that documentation within 3 days if you don't have it when we stop by. And then the only other change in that paragraph was that they previously said that you needed to maintain record confidentiality of these records and the records as explained below. And now they actually say paragraph 33 and 34. It's the same, it's exactly the same thing, but now they're just calling out the specific paragraphs. That's just a technical thing. All right, compensation and funding. In the payment rate, there is no change to this paragraph, but there is an increase in the base allocation rate for 22-23. So the payment rate change is from $2,486 per child to $2,803 per child. And additionally, if you as a provider are paying your staff $15 an hour minimum, you'll actually be eligible to receive $3,421 per child, which is an additional $618. We have not, and before you ask, we have not received any guidance for how we're going to verify that you're paying your instructor $15 an hour. I don't know how they're going to work that out. We're all waiting to see how that's supposed to be confirmed, but we have not gotten any guidance from DEL. There will be some sort of verification. They're going to have to verify in some way, whether that's, I'm just thinking out loud here, so don't say, Tina said it was going to be this way, because I have absolutely no idea how this is going to be. But it may be that, you know, with your e-verify, you have to sign an affidavit saying that you're going to screen your staff. It may be the same thing with the $15. I mean, that would be a good way to do it. If you signed an e-verify, a notarized document saying that you will be paying your staff $15. And then, of course, you will have to produce documentation to support that if at any point there needs to be an audit to verify that. So, okay, I got some questions here. If I am a VPK director, but I'm also the backup VPK teacher, and my VPK teacher is out, do I need to register for both the director webinar and the instructor webinar, or is the director webinar alone okay? Do you mean the training for the STAR early literacy? Is that what you mean by the webinar? I think as long as you are not filling in on a permanent basis.
Hey Ariel, the STAR literacy training that Tina's been referencing and kind of gearing us towards has two parts on the website. You'll see one is for the director and one's for the instructor. They're very similar, and I don't know that it would be a good use of your time to do both. If on your VPK application you're listed as the director and the sub, then your main role is the director, and I would register and complete the director portion of that webinar. The only thing you're going to see that's a little bit different between those is where they're using the word admin versus, I can't remember the exact language they have, but they're referring to your instructor who's going to be administering and or your person that's going to be doing the assessment with those students. So just go ahead and register for that director portion of that, and I think you'll be okay.
All right, and Phyllis asked the question, will STAR early literacy be implemented in kindergartens, public and private? And if so, will it be subject to the same requirements you are explaining here? So in the preschool classrooms for the district, yes, they will be using STAR early literacy. And if I remember the legislation correctly, I believe this is going to be going up through several grades. I need to go back and read that. So please don't take that and run with it yet. I will have to follow up and check that out and get back with you on that. But when we were at the training, and Ashley can correct me if I'm wrong, they were talking about this, you know, they have STAR early literacy that goes all the way up through third grade as an assessment tool.
That's correct. And was it Amanda, Tina from the department who was kind of our guiding person?
Amber Givens.
Amber was sharing some information that while we're working through a lot of trial and error for this first year, that they were talking about having there be some type of tie for that child that participated in VPK at ABC preschool, that the information will be linked and tracked with the student as they move through whatever grade up to whatever grade. Right now, that's not in place, but I believe that that was early conversation so that that would transition all the way through. And if there's any excelling points that those are shared, and or if there's any areas of opportunity, that as well. So hopefully that helped answer for you, Phyllis.
Okay, so the compensation and funding, back to that. I was talking about the points. I want to show you a quick slide here and then we're going to bounce back. This is the VPK payment rate chart that has come out from the Division of Early Learning for VPK. And you can see the increase here from last year, from last year, it was 2486 for the 540 hours, the school year time. And now it's 2803. And here is the base student allocation for VPK programs that pay $15 per hour is that 3421. So this is where you're going to see all of this. I'm not sure whether or not we have this on our website, but this might be something that we might be able to put on there. I'll have to check and see. But this is out there. It has both their logo. It has the Division of Early Learning and the VPK logo on it. So it is out and about in black and white. Okay. Okay, now I'm going to talk about this paragraph 40 that was added to the contract. And this is about a differential payment. For those of you who are in school readiness, you know that based on your composite score for class, you can get a % differential above the standard based on your composite score. What they're looking at for VPK, and I'm going to read this directly from the statute so that I'm not misquoted. And Tina said we were going to get a differential. I'm not saying that because I'm going to read this and it says, subject to an appropriation, the department shall provide for a differential payment to private pre-kindergarten and public school-based providers' performance metric designation. So, you know, before with the readiness rate, you had a score. And your score, if your score was a 60 or higher, you were fine. And if you were below a 60, then you went on probation and you had an improvement plan that you had to execute. What they're saying now is that for those providers whose performance metric designation at the end of the 22-23 program year have the potential to get an additional amount of funding not to exceed 15% of the base student allocation if they are on the performance metric designations above proficient. So the designations are unsatisfactory, emerging proficiency, proficient, highly proficient, and excellent. Those are the designations that are going to be used moving forward on your performance metric. So, and it says right in the statute, a private kindergarten provider or school may not receive a differential payment if it receives a designation of proficient or lower. So only highly proficient and excellent designations will be eligible for that differential, subject to the appropriation of the funding. So that's not a promise because they have to find the money to do it. And it may very well depend on how many providers end up in those categories. So anyway, wanted to let you know about that, but that is the new paragraph that has been added. All right, any questions about that? Okay. Provisions for provider accountability. This is where we're going to talk about the readiness rates and the performance metric. So this paragraph is changed to include the references to the new performance metric. It moved the provider on probation paragraph down to paragraph 51. It also then eliminates the language around provider on probation requirements of an improvement plan, a readiness rate, revocation of eligibility. All of that language has been changed. They've condensed the language to refer to the information in the statute. And it says that each program will receive a program assessment by a qualified assessor in each classroom. Those of you that do school readiness, you know, we only do half of each aged group. So like if you had 2 infant rooms, we'd only do 1 of them. So each program is each classroom for VPK will be assessed. And the results will be received by the provider within 14 days from the Department of Early Learning. Okay, so the assessor will come back, they will write their report, they will put everything into the system. And that is, I'm sure, where those results are going to come from. Is that correct, Camille? Yes, she's nodding her head. Yes. Okay, good. All right. So beginning with the 22-23 program year, they're going to be, it requires the Division of Early Learning to develop a methodology for calculating the pre-K providers and the school district's providers performance metric. And it's going to, your performance metric is going to be a combination of the following items. That program assessment, the class assessment composite scores will be weighted at no less than 50%. So the class assessment composite score will be 50% of your total performance metric designation. The other 2 pieces that will go into your performance metric are going to be the learning gains of the students from progress monitoring 1 to progress monitoring 3. And the final piece will be the norm reference developmental learning outcomes. And those outcomes would be from the test going into kindergarten. Okay. Now, there are a lot of individualized options and narrative for children using the STAR early literacy. There are standards built in for children who have an IEP or a 504 plan. So when you're taking your training, you're going to get a lot of that information about how to deal with the children who do that. There are some children who will be ineligible to take the STAR early literacy. Obviously, children who may have hearing and visual deficiencies may not be able to manage this assessment tool because it is done in this fashion electronically. All right. So the last rule workshop was around some of the new designation terminology. There may be some changes in these terms, but the ones that I gave you, unsatisfactory, emerging proficiency, proficient, highly proficient, and excellent, are the 5 terms that are available right now. Now, again, we're not going to see any of this until the completion of this 22-23 program year. So then when we talk about a provider on probation, for this year, anyone who is a provider on probation after they've finished calculating everything this year, if you were a provider on probation last year and you were not able to meet that score of 60 or above and come off this year, you will continue with your approved improvement plan that you had for last year. For those of you who were able to get off, good job. Congratulations. Job well done. Excellent work. Moving forward, however, after the 22-23 year and your performance metric comes out, any of those programs who are on the designation level of emerging proficiency or unsatisfactory will be a provider on probation, and there will be 2 requirements you will have to meet in your improvement plan. It will include a staff development plan, and you must use an approved DEL curriculum. So it's no longer a choice, you have to do both. And probably if the result of your composite score is the catalyst for the designation, that staff development plan will be directly related to training for staff on the class tool. Okay. Any questions about that? Is everybody still awake? Just checking. Okay, good. All right. All right. The next change in the contract is in the termination and non-compliance section. So as you know, school districts have been added to the coalition's responsibility for monitoring. They are now also named specifically in the revocation of eligibility section of the contract. So school districts are no longer exempt from being terminated and made ineligible to participate in VPK. There has been a change in the revocation term. It used to be 5 years. If you had your contract terminated, you were ineligible to provide VPK programming for 5 years. It has now been updated. The language has been updated now to read at least 2 years, but no more than 5. And this is where this is going to impact the coalition's eligibility enforcement policies. We're going to either receive guidance from DEL as to how do we determine whether it's 2 or 5 years, or we are going to have to set some sort of a standard internally in protocols as to how we're going to determine whether someone is ineligible for 2, 3, 4, or 5 years. So that's one of the things that's going to affect our local policy. The reasons for the revocation of eligibility include low classification for 3 years in a row on your performance metric. So on the performance metric, if your designation is unsatisfactory or emerging proficiency for 3 years in a row, that will result in a revocation of eligibility for a term of between 2 to 4 years, or 2 to 5 years, I'm sorry. And then a provider on probation for 2 consecutive years that failed to meet the performance metric designation and who is not granted a good cause exemption. The good cause exemption is still there and available. They did not remove that. And so that is the bulk of the changes in the language in the contract for this year. The rest of the changes in the contract are those DEL from OEL references that I mentioned before. And we do want to let you know that these changes will affect coalition policies. As I said, we're going to have to look at our eligibility and revocation policy. But that's the bulk of the change in the wording. But we still have a few things that we want to cover here. School district locations are now monitored by ELC. I mentioned this already. The oversight adds 70 locations and approximately 140 or so classrooms on average to the contract specialist caseload. So Ashley and Amanda, who have previously had about around 100 programs on their caseloads, now will have between 130 and 140 programs on their caseload. So I'm saying that because I am asking for their mental health and emotional health, that you please be patient and allow enough time for them to be able to provide you with what you need. This is a huge load that they're taking on, and we want to make sure that we set timelines and deadlines that will allow them to help you to the best of their ability. But we're going to need for you to make sure that you're adhering to the timelines and the deadlines that we put out there to give them the time that they need to do what they have to do. We will be revising our enforcement policy. I talked about that. There have been some questions asked, oh, well, what if my lead instructor leaves partway through the year? And I don't have another person. Can I hire somebody and they can work on the classes while they're teaching? And the answer to that is instructor and director educational requirements are a prerequisite for instruction in the classroom. Now, Amanda said last night, because this question came up last night, is if you have a sub, you can have a sub in place doing the work, up until you run out of your substitute hours, to get that person up to speed, a new instructor up to speed. We have been encouraging directors to go ahead and get their instructor certification, particularly in smaller programs, for exactly that reason, so that you don't have to worry about it. But that is an option. The specialists cannot initiate a contract until the application is approved, and the application cannot be approved if the coursework is not complete. So please be aware that you need to do that. Application and contract submission timelines are going to have a deadline of applications must be submitted and be correct by July the 22nd. That's a week from tomorrow. And once your application is submitted and approved, contract will be initiated right away. Keep an eye on your email box. But your contracts must be signed and submitted by August 1st if you are intending to start your programs on August the 10th. Now, if you're not planning on starting on August the 10th, then you have a little bit more time. But for those of you that are starting on August the 10th or planning to, you need to make sure that you have your application in and it's correct by the 22nd. And that when you get your contract, it is back to us and signed by the 1st. Because we've gone from 200 VPK providers to 270 VPK providers. And just so you know, applications and contracts are processed in the order in which they are received. So the last in or the last out, the first in or the first out. All right, reimbursement reminders and tips. If you go on our website on the For Providers tab, there are a lot of resources for not only for reimbursement, for all kinds of other things, but mostly for reimbursement. There's reimbursement resources. There's a tip sheet. The provider portal user guide is on our website. You actually have access to the provider portal user guide on your dashboard in your portal. Down in the bottom right-hand corner of your dashboard page, there is a box called frequently used links. I don't know if you've ever noticed it, but it's there. And in there is the provider portal user guide. This is a wonderful document because it is a guide to doing everything you need to do in the portal. And what I like about it, because I need this, is it not only has written instructions, but it has pictures. I need pictures. I need to know that if I did what it told me I did, that I'm on the right page. So utilize that provider portal user guide when you're trying to do something new in the system that you've not done before, and it will give you step-by-step instructions. Okay. That's everything from doing your contract to changing information in your profile to doing your attendance and uploading your documentation into the document library. All of those instructions are in there. As enhancements are made to the portal, the provider portal user guide is updated. So if you're a person who likes to print out the portal guide onto paper, just know that when updates are made, they do a new portal guide. So you may have an outdated copy if you haven't printed one off recently, because I believe they updated it just a week or two ago, end of June. So make sure that you have the most recent copy if you're going to be printing it out. You also want to make sure that you double side your copies because it is a very large document. Okay. Now I had some questions here that I missed because I forgot to scroll down. They're asking about the assistant. Does the assistant also need to be paid $15 minimum? We don't think so. They were talking about the instructor. They did not mention the word aide or assistant. They mentioned instructor, but we really need to check the language on that to be sure, but I'm almost sure that they mean for the lead teacher. Because there would be absolutely no incentive to be the lead teacher if you were an assistant, you got paid exactly the same as the person who's the main person who's responsible for the instruction. I mean, it doesn't make sense. But we will look into that and make sure that that is correct. Okay. Is there someone I can reach out to for more help understanding the class? Yes, you can. Did you answer any of these, Camille? Yes, Camille is going to reach out to you. There we go. Okay, the links for the FAST training are available on the OEL website. So I would have to go to the OEL website and click on the link and then go in to register for the training in order to get that to you. So if you go to the website that Camille put in earlier, she put in a link to the FloridaEarlyLearning.com. Click on the VPK tab and then use the drop-down menu to find the FAST information. I'm not sure who asked this question. Rocky Top PC. I'm not sure who that is. I completed my contract. How do I know we will get the 34.21 rate because we meet the requirements? Again, we don't have any guidance from OEL as to how we're DEL as to how we're supposed to be determining that. We have a little bit of time before we'll be paying out for VPK. So I will be checking with reimbursement and asking that question of our friends in Tallahassee. And as soon as we know, we will let you know. The performance metric, someone asked, is the performance metric based on the final assessment PM3? The learning gains portion of the performance metric takes a look at your PM1 responses from the children and your PM3. That's the learning gains throughout the year. Part of your performance metric will be based on the changes in the children's understanding between PM1 and PM3, their learning gains. The other part is going to be on the outcomes, the learning outcomes, which is determined by the entry to kindergarten test. Can parents opt out of the tool? That is going to have to be a question that goes up to OEL. If you're saying the child's not allowed technology. I'm writing that down for later. Okay. If you need to change instructors mid-year and they have all the necessary requirements, you just submit an amendment. What you need to do is you need to go in and update your application. I would contact your contract specialist and say, hey, my lead instructor just left and I'm bringing in someone else. I wanted to let you know that. So you need to go in and update and resubmit your application so that we can verify that that person does indeed meet all the requirements. I don't know if the entrance to kindergarten test is the same as PM3. PM3 is the progress monitoring. It's going to be the same type of assessment that you use throughout the year. The learning outcomes, I'm not sure how they're going to be measuring those. All right, so the reimbursement reminders and tips. There are samples there and instructions and frequently asked questions. There are instructions for reimbursement detail reports. And of course, then they will have the provider portal user guide available for you to utilize. We have another question, Nancy McGreevy, and Ashley, you may need to help me answer this question. Will you be able to pull reports to show learning gains between PM1 and PM2 and PM2 and PM3?
Yes, absolutely. Part of the review through that STAR training is it's going to show you what the test looks like, as the child is taking it. It's going to have you practice taking the test as a child. And then on the next part, it's going to show you how you make sure that your calendar is set up the right way so that the computer knows that it's time for you to take the first one, second one, third one, as well as how to get the reports, download the reports, get the scores to share with the parents. The parents have to have a copy of that within the 7 days, like Tina said earlier. And then it'll also show you how to get the reports as comparisons.
It was pretty neat. We were there, what, 3 hours, Ashley? 3 hours for that training? So it's a lot of information.
The Zoom session that you guys are doing is a lot shorter, and it will reference the Renaissance homepage, and it'll show you kind of like a dummy test site to get in and review, as well as, some definitions, how to run the report for when you forget how to do something. So the website, as well as after the training, is really helpful for a good resource. So I would definitely save that website to your desktop.
Okay, now just a few tips for contract and application processing. We want you to be successful with that. Every time we have to reject an application or reject a contract and we go back and forth, that takes your time and it takes our time. So one of the things that we're going to ask that you do is just slow down and read everything very carefully and follow the prompts. There are the one issue that we're finding is marking non-instructional days. If you were taking the whole week of Thanksgiving, you don't want to go in and mark Monday and then mark Tuesday and then mark Wednesday as individual days. You want to mark the entire week. Right, Ashley? I got that correct? Otherwise, it kind of messes up your calendar.
That's correct. We were finding during some admin and record keeping, obviously the way the application process used to be done via paper is no longer. We do things all electronically. So the form that downloads the things that you put into EFS Mod on your application doesn't have the appropriate squares for the whole program year if you list each individual day that you're closed. If you're only closed one day, then obviously that appears on the line. But like Tina was referencing, most people are closed the whole week of Thanksgiving, Christmas, New Year, and some form of spring break. Whether it's 3 days or 5, anything over 1 should be listed as a Monday through or Wednesday through Friday so that it downloads appropriately to the forms that are required for us to keep track of. If you have more specific questions or you're still struggling with that, you can contact Amanda or I will be able to help you over the phone.
And Ashley, if you don't mind, why don't you just go ahead and talk about the Instructor Tab and the transcript requirements and all of that?
Sure, absolutely. So I know a lot of providers have already been submitting their applications and or are working on them this week. Like Tina was reminding us, the deadline, if you're anticipating and planning to start on the first day that Pinellas County goes back on August 10th, is next Friday. Also, Tina did remind you there's 2 of us and we took on an additional 70 providers and they're done in the order that they're received. So if you submit it today and you think it's going to get looked at today, I really appreciate your enthusiasm. not a super possibility of that happening right now. So don't think that, oh, I got it in on the deadline. If there's an error, like we're trying to go over and reference here on this slide, and it has to be returned, it takes longer to get that done for you to start and get paid, and for us to go through and have to relook at everything. The next information that's down there is really related to the director and mostly the lead instructor. Everybody had to do additional trainings like we were referencing before, the director's credential endorsement, the extra literacy hours. So everybody essentially should have an updated transcript under the tab, either related to their job duties. So when we're going through and you don't have those things uploaded, or the transcript doesn't reflect the coursework that you were required to complete, we have to reject it and send it back. The correct standards course is the implementing the Florida standards in the classroom 3 years old to kindergarten. If you took a previous version of standards, Florida standards 4-year-old, that's wonderful. The one we're looking for has the SVLP, I think is the acronym. So just make sure that that the director and the lead instructor both need to take the updated standards course. That's probably one of the only courses that overlaps for those two job descriptions. I think there was a little bit confusion we were seeing on some people that were maybe newer to filling out their application. The part on your instructor tab that says degree and credential should match. So if they have 40 clock hours, it should say 40 clock hours. If they have a technical certificate, then that should match that they have an active certificate. So just take the time, follow the directions, and slow down with that part. Sorry, I'm dog sitting and he's barking at the cat. I'm so sorry. The last thing is just making sure the attestation is supposed to be returned under the instructor tab. The acknowledgement form is an annual form for licensing, and just make sure you're using the updated form that's from May of 2019 on the bottom of your attestation, and that you cannot witness your own.
Thank you, Ashley. Yes. The attestation form, I know it says that the director or the owner is supposed to sign it, but if you are the director and the owner, you cannot sign your own, even though it says director or owner needs to sign it. So you cannot sign your own attestation form. Ensuring that your names match. If you've been married or you went from a different name or you have a name change, you need to make sure that your forms are all in alignment with your name so that we can make sure that everything is from a single individual. So thank you, Ashley, for helping with that. There is a question here. The standard training requirement required of all VPK instructors. Flora, I think she got that. It is the implementing the Florida standards in preschool classrooms, 3-year-olds to kindergarten. That is the only standards course which is acceptable. And then, is it okay to submit an old transcript for an aide who does not need the extra literacy courses? Ashley?
Sorry, I was just trying to clarify, make sure I understood the question correctly. So on the application, like I was saying, everyone has to upload a new transcript. I apologize. I guess I wanted to clarify for the lead and the director who had to take those additional requirements. If your aide did not take any additional CEUs and the transcript that's in there isn't expired, like if they have a technical certificate that's expired, then yes, you would have to upload a new one. If not, then you don't need to upload a new form that's the same as the one that's already in there.
Okay, great. All right, so here is a contract situation, and we have this happen in school readiness, and we had to reject a lot of contracts for this. And I understand how this happens, because you read this and it says from VPK 20 electronic signature, you are about to electronically sign form OEL VPK 20. And then it asks for your title. And that's not highlighted in yellow when you're looking at it in the contract. I highlighted it in yellow for the purposes of this session. So it's going to talk about your signature and talk about your signature and then ask for your title. Please make sure that you put your title there, because if you type your name in there, we have to reject your contract and send it back. Okay. So just slow down and read everything very carefully, because this is a little deceptive when they do this. All right. Here are some basic reminders of things that are in your contract that a lot of people forget about. And really, honestly, non-compliance with these notifications could very well result in changes in your instructional calendar dates and push your year further out, or it could also result in loss of funding days. So it's really very important to let us know when there are issues and changes. So now, while you have up to 14 days notification for changes, best practice is to notify us of any staff changes as soon as they happen, because we don't want you to have a loss of funding if the staff are not actually approved for the position. So best practice is really to let us know right away. Contact your contract specialist, get in there and be working in your application, get the information uploaded so that we can confirm that that person is able to fill that position and meets all the requirements. Temporary closures. A lot of people wait till the end of the month when it's time to submit their attendance and their enrollment or their attendance for the month to put in their temporary closures. It is best to put you're supposed to put your temporary closure in by close of business, the first business day. And you do have to put in documentation to have your temporary closures approved. So we really should be informed when the program reopens. We should know within a couple days. Temp closures are entered in your portal on your attendance tab, and reimbursement validates those closures and communicates with us for verification if we know whether or not you were closed. Now, during COVID, we had a situation, and it's still COVID. We still have COVID. But if you have a closure, the Department of Health is no longer issuing letters to verify closures. So, if you call and there's a recommendation and they say, well, we really think that you need to close the room and for a day and heavy duty clean it, or whatever their recommendation is. If you put that on your letterhead, or you send an email home to your parents and you say, Department of Health recommendation is, or it is necessary for us to clean this classroom. We've had 3 children sick in the last week. If you send that email or that letter home, that is something that you can upload as your documentation for closure around a COVID or an illness that knocks out your classroom. Okay. Permanent closures or changes in ownership. We've had, I don't know, at least 4 sales in the last 5 months of early childhood programs. You are required by your contract to provide a 30-day notice of a closure or a change in ownership. Contracts do not transfer to the new owner. The contract is specific to the person who signs it, the corporation, the owner who signs it. If you sell your business, the last day you provide care before the new owner takes over the facility, that's the day your contract ends. And they must have a contract moving forward in order to continue getting paid for the children who are there. 30 days notice is required. That gives us time, because if you are permanently closing, we have to find places for the children to go. If you are changing in ownership, there are closeout things that you have to do and return back to the coalition. You need time to get those together and organized to turn back into the coalition for audit purposes. The new owner has to do things to prepare to get their new contract. You all know you have all that documentation you have to upload every year. Your child care license, your certificate of liability insurance, your E-Verify document, your W-9, your your EIN letter, your electronic funds transfer letter from the bank. All of that stuff has to be uploaded. You know, that doesn't happen overnight. So the new owner needs to be able to get their profile and all that documentation in order. So there are very few down days for them to get paid after the sale. So please make sure that if you are planning to do this, if you're planning on closing or you're planning on selling, remember to let us know at least 30 days in advance. Now, I'm going to tell you this because this is what has happened for the last few sales. In the broker who is managing the change in ownership, in their paperwork, they often have a non-disclosure agreement they ask all parties to sign. That non-disclosure agreement is in direct conflict with your contract. So if you don't tell us, and I will tell you this, at the last sale, we got 2 days notice of the sale, which leaves everybody scrambling. So please make sure that you're aware of that and have that discussion with the broker if you're considering a sale. All right. Updating your private provider profile every year. It's actually really helpful if when you get your new certificate of insurance that you upload it right away instead of waiting for the annual provider update. Annual provider updates happen between January and March every year. So annual provider update is supposed to be completed by March 1st. And then that period of March through July is for applications and contracts for the upcoming program year. And again, first in, first out, last in, last out. That's how we do things here. So any applications submitted after that date can't be guaranteed to have a certified contract by the time you want to start, if you're wanting to start on the very first day you're eligible. So again, I'm going to say we just picked up 70 extra providers. That makes it really difficult for the team to get things processed. So please allow time when you need something done. Make sure you're giving us enough lead time to help you. We really want to do it, and we want to do it with as little stress as possible for everybody. So time is the key there. Does anybody have any questions about contract reminders or tips, or any questions about the application while Ashley's here? Oh, good. Angela found some good information. Thank you, Angela. She went into Florida Statute 1002.53. And you can all read what that says. It says eligibility and enrollment. Each parent who enrolls his or her child in the voluntary pre-K kindergarten or education program must allow his or her child to participate in coordinated screening and progress monitoring. So if that parent is not willing to do that, they can't enroll in that program. Thank you, Angela. It's so helpful to have extra people on here who can run around and look these things up while I'm trying to go through the script. I love that. Teamwork makes a dream work. It's excellent. All right, so I don't have anything else to give you at this time. Remember, a good number of the things that we're looking to have happen this next year have not been figured out yet. So as we get information, we will absolutely share it with you on all of those questions that we couldn't answer because we don't have any guidance yet. So it is a work in progress. This next year is going to be a little crazy. I know if any of you are like me, you like to know what's happening. You like to have it all organized. You have to have everything planned out, and it makes you crazy if you can't have all the answers that you need to make that happen. And I understand exactly how you feel because we feel exactly the same way. But we will get through this together. I'm not going to say let's hold hands and sing Kumbaya, but we are going to get through this together. So let's just be patient with one another and remember that we're all in this together. So any other questions for the benefit of the group? If not, I want to thank you all for your time. Thank you for your questions. And if you have anything else that you need, please let us know. Ashley and Amanda are available for you. I have Ashley and Amanda's information here. This is their email. These are their email addresses. For those of you that are also contracted for school readiness, the school readiness contract specialists are listed on the top, VPK on the bottom. Thank you all for your time. If you had a question that you weren't comfortable putting in the chat box and you want to ask it later, don't be afraid to give us a call. Okay? We thank you.